The day my husband died, I didn't shed a single tear. Not because I wasn't devastated, because I was. But because I knew what was coming next would hurt far more than death ever could. I kept quiet. I said nothing about the $24 million sitting untouched in a trust fund with my name on it. Nothing about the high-rise tower in downtown Chicago titled solely to me. Nothing about the years of financial planning and silent power Henry and I had tucked away, just for a moment like this. That night, while his family was still wiping away performative tears, his daughter-in-law burst into the room like a storm in heels. "Start packing," she snapped. "The old freeloader doesn't live here anymore." I looked up from the cup of chamomile tea I hadn't touched and said only one word. "All right." That was all I said. But in my chest, something old and quiet woke up. A storm I'd been holding back for years. Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Lorraine Kingsley. I'm 62 years old, and until that day, I thought the deepest pain I could ever endure was losing the man I'd loved for 37 years. I was wrong. The funeral had been everything Henry would have wanted: dignified, understated, filled with people whose lives he had touched from boardrooms to backyard barbecues. I sat in the front row, wearing the emerald wool dress he bought me for my last birthday, the one he said made me look dangerously elegant. I held myself upright with the kind of grace that only comes from years of learning how to endure. They all said what a devoted wife I had been. How I cared for him without complaint through every hospital visit, every bad night, every slow descent into illness. But none of them really knew the truth. His son from a previous marriage, Thomas, gave a moving eulogy. Meredith, his daughter, read a poem that felt like it had been selected by committee. Even his ex-wife, Elaine, managed to say something kind about the man who had left her decades earlier, for me. I listened. I nodded. I accepted condolences with a smile that never quite reached my eyes. Because beneath the grief, something colder was growing. They didn't see me as his widow. Just the second wife. The add-on. The reception was held at our house, or what they assumed was still our house. I stood in the corner with a glass of untouched white wine, watching strangers sift through photo albums like they were museum exhibits. Distant relatives eyed the furniture with quiet appraisal, like they were already mentally redecorating. Meredith's husband, Paul, hovered near the study, fishing for details about Henry's business interests. Thomas's wife, Rachel, kept whispering about how well located the house was. But it was Charlotte, Daniel's wife, who truly made her presence known. She married into the family 3 years ago and made it abundantly clear from the beginning that she thought I was dead weight. A gold digger, in her eyes. A placeholder. A woman clinging to comfort that didn't belong to her. All afternoon, she watched me like a hawk wearing lipstick. Every time I stepped out of the room, she'd whisper with Meredith behind half-closed doors. Every time I sat down, she'd shoot me a small, sharp smile that never touched her eyes. By 8:30, the last guest was gone. I was alone in the kitchen, hands trembling as I loaded the dishwasher. The clink of porcelain was the only sound, until I heard them. Deliberate footsteps. No attempt to hide. And then her voice. "Well, that's done," Charlotte said, arms crossed as she appeared in the doorway. I didn't turn around. "Thanks for helping with the reception," I murmured. "Henry would have appreciated." "Cut the act, Lorraine." Her words sliced the air in two. I turned slowly to face her, and behind her stood Daniel, his eyes cast downward. Meredith and Thomas flanked them, their postures stiff. It felt like a courtroom. And I was the one on trial. Charlotte stepped closer, voice sharpened to a point. "The grieving widow routine? You can drop it now. It's time we discuss the next steps." "What next steps?" I asked, though I already knew. "This house. Henry's estate. The company. Daniel and I have talked with the others. We think it's time you started looking for somewhere more appropriate to your situation." The words hit harder than the diagnosis had. My situation? Charlotte didn't even blink. "You're 62. You never worked. Henry provided everything, the house, the money, the lifestyle. But now that he's gone, we all need to be practical. Meredith cleared her throat like she was softening the blow. This place is far too large for one person. The upkeep alone is. Are you telling me to leave? I asked quietly. Charlotte smiled. Not kindly. I'm telling you to be realistic. There are some great senior communities in the area. Assisted living, if needed. We've already started making some calls. The kitchen swayed beneath my feet. This is my home, I said, barely above a whisper. I've lived here for 15 years. And I'm sure you're grateful, Thomas said, as if he were reading from a script. But Dad would want us to be smart. We've got families of our own. Kids. Futures to think about. Richard left a will, I said. And we'll honor whatever minor arrangement he left for you, Charlotte replied breezily. But let's be honest, he built this empire long before you came along. You didn't create anything with him. You were just there. Those words. Just there. After 37 years of building a life together, of sitting beside hospital beds and negotiating contracts and comforting him through every storm, I was just there. I think you should start packing tonight, Charlotte continued. Daniel and I can manage things from here. I looked to Daniel, my stepson, the boy I had raised like my own. But he wouldn't even meet my eyes. Where do you expect me to go? I asked, voice cracking. There are options, Charlotte said with a shrug. Affordable ones. I stood there, surrounded by people I had called family, feeling not grief, but erasure. And then? I smiled. Not because I was okay. But because I had just remembered what they had all forgotten. I wasn't just the widow. I was the woman Henry trusted more than anyone. And I was about to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. That's when I reminded myself, and anyone listening, that assumptions can be dangerous. Malcolm spent the next hour guiding me through paper after paper, explaining the legal steps, confirming the financial structures Henry and I had created years ago, when no one was watching. Most widows, I later learned, drown in legal jargon and probate procedures. They are overwhelmed by the maze of trusts, estate plans, and asset transfers. But I was never like most widows. Once Malcolm left, I drove past the house, the home I'd shared with Henry for nearly 2 decades. I parked across the street, hiding behind darkened windows, and watched as moving trucks rolled in. Charlotte stood in the driveway, barking orders, directing workers through the rooms like a battlefield general. She pointed to what had been Henry's study, then the master bedroom. She'd even brought her own furniture. It hit me then, she wasn't just sorting things out. She had taken residence. My phone buzzed, a message from Daniel, hope you found a quiet place. Charlotte's organizing Dad's office. Found some business folders we'll need your input on. I let out a bitter chuckle. Business folders. If only they knew that Henry's true business files were locked away downtown in a deposit box, with property deeds, stock ledgers, documents worth more than dozens of seminars could explain. Let them sift through desk drawers and file cabinets. Let them find appointment books and old client names from that modest consulting firm everyone thought was our family's only income. Let them draw up spreadsheets, divvy up modest inheritances in their heads. Because the truth? It would demolish everything, when they ready for it. That afternoon, I slipped into a branch of the Midwest Metropolitan Bank where I kept accounts the family didn't even know existed. Margaret Lee, my personal banker and friend, greeted me softly. Mrs. Kingsley, I'm so sorry for your loss. Her voice was sincere, yet professional. I'm holding up, I said. I need to adjust some accounts. She nodded, assuming I'd only want to change beneficiaries or add Henry's name to something. Instead, I handed her Malcolm's paperwork. Her eyes widened, small gasp. Mrs. Kingsley, this portfolio. I had no idea. Privacy meant something to us. But times have changed. When would you like these transfers to go through? Today. As Margaret started processing the request, I thought back to Charlotte at the house, rifling through closets, sorting out which pieces of glassware were hers. I thought of Meredith and Thomas huddled with financial planners, cold coffee in hand, trying to map out a future they thought was secure. I thought of Daniel, my stepson, so weak he let his wife degrade the woman who raised him. They thought they'd squeezed me out. They didn't know they'd picked a fight with someone who understood long games better than they could ever dream. My phone blinked mid-signature. Charlotte's name appeared. I let it go to voicemail and played the message. Lorraine, found some odd paperwork in Dad's study. Legal stuff that makes no sense. Call me. Confusing paperwork. I smiled. Because that didn't matter. They were rattled. Everything wasn't lining up, and would only crumble further. I deleted the message. Let them sweat. That night, I ordered room service and watched the evening news like any other pensioner seeking quiet across those channels. But I wasn't alone. I had Malcolm. Margaret. A network of professionals quietly managing my affairs. And, above all, time. Charlotte and her allies thought they had won. But they'd just declared war on a woman who had built her facade long before she became part of their family. The Widow Act was over. It was time for Lorraine Kingsley to step out of the shadows. 3 days passed. The messages from Charlotte became urgent, demanding, pleading, explanations, signatures, appearances. I didn't respond. Instead, I spent my mornings in the hotel's office, making moves that would leave them breathless. Tuesday, I called the property manager in charge of my 3 apartment buildings on Lakeview Avenue. Wednesday, I met with my finance advisor to shift assets between trusts. Thursday, I sat through a video call with architects about renovating my Fulton Street loft, a warehouse I bought years ago for the price of dreams. Now worth millions, renting to boutique studios at rates their eyes would pop over. They didn't know. To them, I'd always been the second wife, the passive partner. Then, Friday morning, Malcolm called. They'd hired legal counsel. I grinned. Jonathan Myers, from Myers & Kerr, no relation, he claimed. What was their angle? They wanted a review. Something in Henry's estate supposedly raised questions. How considerate. And they're requesting a formal reading, Malcolm added. All beneficiaries must attend, including you. Perfect. Lorraine, are you ready for this? He asked. I looked out the window at ordinary people stiff in Monday traffic. I've been ready for years. That weekend, I didn't shop at bargain bins. I visited my favorite boutique in Lincoln Park, where they welcomed me by name, chose a slate gray suit, heirloom pearls, and my grandmother's watch. I wanted to look like exactly who I was, underestimated, refined, and dangerous when provoked. Sunday night I moved into the penthouse at the Grand Terrace Hotel, just for one night. I ordered lobster and champagne, reviewed Malcolm's documents, and reminded myself, this wasn't a showdown. It was the beginning. Monday's sky was gray. I stepped into Myers & Kerr early. The young receptionist barely looked up, until I calmly said my name. You're here about the estate, she asked. I am. Lorraine Kingsley. The hallway burst to life. They didn't even need her here, Charlotte snapped. The law requires she be present, a male voice replied. She scoffed. She did nothing to earn this. At that moment I sat calm, demure, past the acts they thought they knew. At exactly 2, Malcolm arrived. With him walked Naomi Grant, her presence not lost on anyone. Mrs. Kingsley, Malcolm introduced. Meet Naomi Grant. She'll represent your interests today. Naomi extended a firm hand, eyes unbroken. Jonathan Myers appeared, sweat forming on his brow. I believe everyone's here now, he said, voice crackling. Shall we begin? They took their positions. Charlotte poised at one side, suited, shaded. They looked like inheritors, confident and ready. I sat opposite them, Malcolm to my right, Naomi to my left. Jonathan cleared his throat, reading the will. To my children, Thomas, Meredith, and Daniel, I leave $60,000 each. Silence. Mirrors cracked. Because they hadn't heard the rest yet. And then I leaned forward, calm as a winter dawn, as Jonathan Myers continued reading the will. But no one was listening anymore. After a magnificent pause, he said, "And to my beloved wife, Lorraine Kingsley, I bequeath the remainder of my estate, every asset, property, investment, and business interest, completely and without restriction." The room went silent. Resolved. Final. You could have heard a pin drop. Faces froze in a tableau of shock, anger, betrayal. Finally, Charlotte broke the silence. Her voice sliced through the stillness like glass. "Could you repeat that last bit?" Jonathan shifted. "Yes. The bulk of Mr. Holloway's estate is left to his widow, in full." Meredith's voice trembled down the hall. "What does that include? The house? The firm?" This time it was Naomi Grant who answered, precise and impersonal. "As per the document before us, Mrs. Kingsley inherits all real estate, all financial accounts, all business holdings, and all personal property not designated elsewhere." Thomas's jaw dropped. "That can't be legal. Father would never leave us just $50,000 each." I watched Naomi exchange a glance with Malcolm Green, who leaned forward. "I'm afraid it is. This is precisely what Mr. Holloway specified." Charlotte's composure cracked. "She never contributed to any of this," she hissed. "She's been just," her voice faded into a whisper as she spat the word that had cost me so much, "just present." I rose gently. Every eye in that room focused on me. "For 37 years, I let Henry be the public face of our lives," I said softly. "I let people believe he was the brain, that I was content in the background, and they all believed it. But he's gone now. And I am no longer hiding. I had nothing to do with his success," I continued, voice growing stronger. "That was all him." Their expressions shifted. Confusion, hurt, rising panic. "But the truth is," I said, a faint smile blooming against my grief, "you have been operating under a very expensive assumption about what I own. The real game is just beginning." Naomi unclipped a folder and slid it across the table with surgical precision. "Perhaps we should clarify exactly what constitutes Mr. Holloway's estate," she said. Jonathan shifted uneasily in his seat. Malcolm cleared his throat. "The real question is, did Henry even own the assets you think he did?" Charlotte's smirk faltered. "Of course he did," she murmured, voice brittle. "That's where you're mistaken," Naomi said, placing a document in front of her. "Mrs. Kingsley has held title to nearly every significant asset in this family for over 15 years. Charlotte's fingers trembled as she picked up the paper. Her eyes scanned the title. "Lorraine Kingsley," she repeated, voice faint. "That home," Naomi continued, "was transferred to her in 2008. Henry kept lifetime occupancy, but the ownership was placed entirely in her name." The room held its breath. "But my father bought that house before he met her," Thomas protested. "That's true," Malcolm said. "But he refinanced it in 2007 with her capital. When he did, legal title transferred to her, because she financed it." Marcus's head snapped up. "She had money?" he asked, disbelief plain in his voice. "It wasn't flashy," I said. "I simply chose not to advertise it." Naomi placed another folder in front of him. "This is the ownership record for Kingsley Holdings, LLC, formed in 1996. And Mrs. Kingsley is listed as sole proprietor." Charlotte's face drained of color. "This company owns 17 properties across 3 states, 3 condominium buildings in Chicago, 2 office blocks in Boston, plus a renovated loft complex in River North, appraised at $24 million. The statement hit the room like a tidal wave. "$24 million? Meredith whispered. "That's just one," Malcolm added calmly. "Would you like to see the rest?" Document after document was laid out like cards on a poker table, bank statements, real estate deeds, investment portfolios spanning nationwide. Naomi's summary sheet hovered at the far edge. The total net worth of Mrs. Kingsley's holdings, $45 million, not including what she is inheriting from Henry's estate, which adds roughly $300,000 in liquid assets and personal property. Silence. Charlotte stared. Terror flickered in her eyes. "You're lying," she accused in a small, broken voice. "Which part?" I asked, voice calm. "The part where you were financially independent before Henry? Or the part where you kicked me out of my own home?" Thomas, shaken, asked, "But why didn't he ever speak of any of this?" I leaned back, tranquility flooding me. Because he wanted that image. He wanted people to believe he provided it all, while I managed it quietly. Daniel's voice shook. "So when you asked me to leave?" I shook my head. "No. They had evicted me, the rightful owner, out of my home without cause." Heads fell into hands as realization washed over them. "You thought you punished a helpless widow. Instead, you unleashed a woman capable of wiping you out, legally, with zero effort." Naomi opened another file. "These cards in his office, they were just theater," she announced. "Shrug-worthy, underperforming background income. Not what was financing your lifestyle." Charlotte's knees gave way. How did everything get paid for?" Meredith whispered. "You didn't," I said. "I did. Mortgage, taxes, utilities, insurance, all from my holdings. Henry's consulting payments covered groceries." Charlotte shook. Tears spilled. "You let me reveal it," I said quietly. "You didn't force me. You never saw me as family. You never treated me with dignity." Jonathan looked around, disoriented. "There's no misinterpretation," Malcolm said firmly. "Everything here is documented, lawful, and maintained for years." Marcus's voice quavered. "What does this mean for us?" Naomi adjusted her papers. The final move was yet to come. When the attorney finished reading, a static hush filled the room, until Naomi Grant cleared her throat. "Legally speaking, each of you inherits exactly what Mr. Holloway specified, $60,000 apiece," she stated. Then, coldly precise, she turned toward Charlotte. "And as for your current residence, you are occupying Mrs. Kingsley's property without permission. That constitutes trespassing." The word trespassing landed like a gavel slam. Charlotte's face turned pale, then ashen. "You can't be serious," she whispered. I rose from my seat, standing slowly. "I'm completely serious," I said. "You orchestrated my exit so you could seize what you presumed was yours. Congratulations, you removed the obstacle. What you failed to realize is that nothing you claimed was legally yours in the first place." I collected my purse and gazed at them, the people who had dismissed me, shamed me, tried to erase me. "You have 72 hours to remove everything from my house," I continued softly. "After that, I'll initiate eviction proceedings." I paused at the door. Charlotte's voice pierced my calm. "Lorraine, please. We're family, we can resolve this." I turned, placing one hand on the door handle. "Family, you say?" I echoed quietly. "Yes. We are family. And you've just shown me what that word means to you." With that, I exited the room. The invisible widow was gone. In her place stood a woman who had been underestimated, and underestimated at her peril. The real reckoning was just beginning. The next 72 hours were the most satisfying I'd ever experienced, not due to vengeance, but because for the first time in years, they were facing reality. 6 hours later, the phone rang. Of course, it was Charlotte, her voice a mix of panic and simmering fury. "Lorraine, we need to talk. This has gotten out of hand." I was in a hotel suite overlooking the skyline, sipping a glass of Pinot Noir while the city shimmered under sunset. I smiled. "Has it?" I asked. "I thought we covered everything thoroughly this afternoon." "There has to be a way to work this out," she pleaded. The irony tasted harsh. Family? I thought to myself. You discarded me in the shadows of my grief. Silence. She said we were grieving too, that we weren't thinking clearly, she continued. We? I ended the call. Enough. The next morning, I summoned Daniel to the hotel lobby. While I had considered refusing to see him, a part of me wanted to test where he stood, to observe the man who finally had to speak for himself. He arrived, hollow-eyed, dragging guilt along with him. Lorraine. I'm so sorry. Cynthia, she got carried away. I watched him fidget with his hands. I know, I replied. But you didn't stop her. You could have defended the woman who raised you from age 12. You let her exile me from my own life. Tears filled his eyes. I'm saying something now, he whispered. But not because it's sympathy. Because you don't need charity. You don't need pity. You need respect. My heart trembled against the pain in his expression. He asked the question that hovered between us. What are you going to do to us? I paused. I had the legal power to ruin them, properties, connections, influence. But as I looked at Daniel, the wounded, frightened boy, burnished by a truth he never expected to hear, I chose differently. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted understanding. You have until tomorrow evening to clear your belongings, I said. Then I'll change the locks. After that, you'll face your own lives. Your own decisions. Your consequences. He nodded, deflated but present. Friday at 6, I drove to my house to see if they'd left. The driveway brimmed with vehicles, Thomas's SUV, Meredith's sedan, even unfamiliar cars. A family meeting, clearly. I walked inside with my key, they hadn't changed the locks. Hello, I called, voice calm. I hope you don't mind me letting myself in. It is my home, after all. They sat in the living room like generals plotting strategy. Charlotte in what had been Henry's favorite armchair, flanked by Thomas and Meredith. Daniel near the window, sparse and defeated. Two strangers stood behind them, middle-aged, anxious. Lorraine, Charlotte said, rising. We were hoping you'd stop in. We want to discuss a settlement. A settlement? I raised a brow. For what? I asked. For the house. We've cared for it. We deserve something. My smile was quiet and precise. You're asking for compensation, to live in someone else's home? The older woman cleared her throat. I'm Linda, and this, the man nodded, is Tom Patterson. We're Cynthia's parents. Ah. I nodded. Tell me, Mrs. Patterson, did Cynthia explain things accurately? Her gaze flicked between her daughter and me. I heard I was being evicted. There's no dispute, I replied gently. Henry's will is clear. The estate goes to me. Everything they believed to be his, was mine long ago. Tom's mouth hung open. I have been financially independent since I was 38, I continued. When I met Henry. The house, the lifestyle, they were funded by my assets, not his. Cynthia's face drained of color. The elder Patterson stared, appalled. Mom, she never worked, Cynthia gasped. No, I said softly. I didn't need to. I managed investments, real estate, businesses. I paused. A portfolio worth $45 million. The room collapsed into stunned silence. They'd thrown me out at my darkest hour while depending on me for their comforts. Mother singled out her daughter's name, old maternal shock in her voice. Cynthia, did you actually evict a woman from her own home, during her husband's funeral? It wasn't complicated, I said, voice measured. You treated me accordingly to your assumptions. And for that, I'm sorry, for what you never knew about me. You're discovering the hard way how costly assumptions can be. Tom Patterson rose to his feet, face flushed with shame. Mrs. Kingsley, on behalf of our family, I apologize if what you're saying is true. He turned toward his daughter, disappointment more cutting than anger. "Let's go, Linda. I don't want to be part of this." As Charlotte's parents grouped their belongings and exited, I watched the last of her support crumble. She expected loyalty. Instead, she was exposed for exactly who she was. I cleared my throat. 20 minutes, I said calmly as the front door clicked shut behind them. "Then I'm changing the locks." Panic rose. They scrambled, grabbing hastily packed bags from corners of the room. Meredith and Thomas avoided my gaze as they trudged toward the door. Daniel stood frozen. "And Charlotte?" She was rooted, white-faced, her stare jagged with fury. "This isn't over," she whispered. It was. She left without a word. I watched their cars one by one pull away from my driveway. When the last taillight faded, I called Malcolm. "It's done," I told him. "They're gone. How do you feel?" I paused as I walked through my beloved home, really saw it for the first time since Henry's passing. It felt lighter. Freed from more than just my grief. "I feel free," I answered. And it was true, for the first time in a week. 6 months later, I sat in my garden as dawn painted my rose garden in pink and gold. My phone rang, and I hesitated. These days, I only answered calls that felt worth answering. But the number was familiar. "Mrs. Kingsley," said a calm voice. "This is Dr. Elena Chen at Mercy General. I have a patient asking for you." A chill ran through me. "Who?" "David Holloway. He's listed you as his emergency contact." My heart lurched. 20 minutes later I found myself in a sterile hospital corridor. It was time I untangled myself from gardening gloves and fears, and wore strength instead, so I dressed in the blue dress Henry used to say made me glow, and the freshly polished pearls I wore every day he wasn't there to notice. Inside the room, there was Daniel. His leg in a cast, his arm in a sling, but not broken. His eyes filled with relief when he saw me. "You came?" he whispered. "Of course," I said, sitting beside him. A beat later, he added, "Cynthia's phone is disconnected." That did not surprise me. Word had already gotten around how she'd crashed, emotionally, financially, after being exposed. "Where is she now?" I asked. "Gone. 3 months ago she left, took what savings were left and moved back in with her parents." I could hear the emptiness in his voice. "You said she married me for the money," he went on softly. "When that went away, she vanished." I reached for his hand. "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said firmly, and genuinely. He looked at me with clarity and guilt. "I need to tell you something about that night," he said. "No need," I whispered. "Yes. I do. I was wrong, even then, I knew it was cruel. But I was so angry about the inheritance, I let Cynthia convince me you were the problem." Tears brimmed in his eyes. "You raised me," he said. "You were my mother when my real mother wasn't." I squeezed his hand as tears finally broke free. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, voice cracking. "I needed you to know. I remember who you are. Not the wealthy widow. The woman who stayed." I whispered back, "You didn't throw me away, David. You made a mistake." He squeezed my hand tight. That moment taught me something important. I had every justification to walk away from them forever. They had betrayed and underestimated me. But standing there, gripping Daniel's hand, I saw a young man who now deserved a second chance. Revenge would have meant withholding forgiveness from someone who was trying to change. This wasn't revenge. This was compassion. His eyes glistened with hope. "Then where does this leave us?" he asked. I smiled, through tears. "Here," I said. "We start over. Build a relationship based on who we are, not who we thought we were supposed to be." His eyes welled with fresh tears. "Would you really do that? After everything?" "I'd be willing to try," I said firmly. "But this time, David, it will be different. I won't be the invisible woman who makes everything work behind the scenes. I won't pretend to be less than I am just to make others feel more comfortable. He nodded. I wouldn't want you to. And I'm not going to rescue you from the consequences of your choices. If you want a relationship with me, you'll have to build it yourself, maintain it with integrity, and value it for what it is, not for what you think it can get you. David nodded solemnly. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't about money or inheritance or any material thing. This is about two adults choosing to care about each other, despite a very painful history. I know. And I want that, Alberta. I want to know you. The real you, not the version I made up in my head. I studied his face, watching carefully for any trace of manipulation or desperation. But what I saw was different. For the first time, I saw true remorse, and a willingness to do better. Then we'll try, I said slowly, carefully. With clear boundaries and honest communication. Relief spread across his face. Thank you. Don't thank me just yet. This will be hard work, David. Unlearning 30 years of bad habits and false assumptions takes time. I'm ready for the work, he said. These past 6 months have taught me that I'm stronger than I thought I was. I gave his hand one final squeeze and stood up. I'm going to talk to your doctor about your discharge plan. Do you have a place to stay? I'm renting a studio apartment downtown. It's small, but it's mine. Good. Independence suits you. As I walked toward the door, David called after me. Alberta, what about Marcus and Sarah? Do you think there's a chance? I turned back to him. That's up to them, sweetheart. My door is open, but they have to choose to walk through it, just like you did. And Charlotte? He asked carefully. I paused. Charlotte, who had orchestrated the cruelty. Who showed no regret. Who only regretted losing. Charlotte burned that bridge, I said softly. Some actions have consequences that can't be undone. She revealed her true self, and now she has to live with what she revealed. David nodded. He understood. I left the hospital and walked to my car feeling lighter, freer, like I had just set something down I'd been carrying for years. That evening, I returned to my garden, the same place where I'd sat countless times before. The phone rang twice. Marcus. Then Sarah. They'd clearly heard about David's accident. Both left awkward voicemails. Half-hearted apologies. Tentative requests to talk. Maybe I'd call them back tomorrow. Or maybe I'd wait and see if they call again. I wasn't in a hurry. I had time. I had resources. And, most importantly, I had control over my life, complete control, for the first time in decades. The invisible woman was gone. In her place stood someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. Someone who could choose forgiveness or distance. Reconnection or solitude. Not based on what others expected, but on what felt right. And that, I thought as I watched the stars rise over my roses, was worth more than $47 million. Though, the $47 million certainly didn't hurt. Now I'm curious about you. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Have you ever been underestimated? Dismissed? Cast aside? Comment below. And while you're here, check out the 2 videos on screen, they're both community favorites, and I guarantee they'll surprise you. Thanks for watching until the end.